Welcome back, everyone. Currently inside of your front end, you most likely have this shop-data.json file that we made a couple lessons back. In this video, instead, we're going to replace this with a much more verbose collection of multiple different categories that include different products. So these that we have are all hats. They will now live under a hats object. So what I want to do is actually show you that your data inside of your front end doesn't even have to be JSON. It can easily be a JavaScript file. And in that JavaScript file, it can contain some variable that points to a JSON-like structure with all of the data. So I want you to go into your resources folder, get the shop-data.js code that I have embedded in there, and copy and paste that into this new shop-data.js file. And here what you will see is that inside I have just some const shop data that points to an array of objects which contain the title of the hats and then the items, where you see a very similar pattern to what we had before. Except now we have numerous categories. We have the sneakers, we have the jackets, we have the women's, and we have the men's. And then what we need to do is just export out by default this new shop data. And this JavaScript file now we can import into our projects however we want in order to utilize them. Now, in order for us to properly utilize this data, we're going to have to find a way to get this up onto our Firestore. But there's a couple things we need to do and disable so that our project doesn't break. Because right now, if you remember, our products context is still using this products from the original shopdata.json file. But we don't have that anymore. Now we have a shopdata.js, and this is now shop data. So what we're going to do is we're going to utilize this shop data as well as this context to actually store the new shop data on there. But because we're still exporting out these products in some way that we have different components that rely on, what we need to do is just convert this over into an empty array. So at the very least, everything works, even though you won't see anything anymore on the shop page. If we save this now and we go back to our application, what we see inside of shop is we still have the route working, but there's just no data to display because right now we have an empty array. So that's just setting this up so that our code doesn't break on us. What we need to do now is we need to go into Firebase utils. With these utils, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through creating a method that allows us to upload these categories from that shop data up into the respective collections up in Firestore. So to do this, we're going to need to bring in a couple methods. The first one that we need is we need the collection. So collection actually isn't even from Firestore auth, it's from Firestore. Because Firestore is what governs our database. So we need both the collections method and we need the write batch method. And I'm going to explain to you what both of these are. First, the collection method is the most important. We need the collection method because it'll actually allow us the same way when we were getting a document reference to get a collection reference because we're trying to write to a brand new collection. So here what I'm going to do is I am going to create a new function and I'm going to call it addCollectionAndDocuments because that's what we're doing. We're adding in some new collection as well as the actual documents inside of that collection. So what I want to call this for my first variable that I'm going to pass in is the collection key. This is going to be that key that we saw inside of our DB. So for example, this collection has users as the key. We want one that has categories as the key. So we're going to pass that as a string, but this is just what I'm calling a collection key. And then the next argument is going to be the actual documents that we want to add. So here, let's just call them objects because they're really just JSON objects. So I'll call it objects to add. And this is our function. The other thing to remember is because we're adding to an external source, this is most likely going to be a bunch of async behavior because we're essentially calling out up onto an API in order to store data. So this is async. What we want to do now is I want to think about how it is that we actually create the collection. Because right now it doesn't exist. But as we learned with user document references, as long as we try and find something in the database, Firebase is actually going to create one for us, even if it's not populated, because that's what the document reference is. In our particular case, now we're making a collection reference. So here I'm going to say const collection reference is equal to collection, passing in our DB, because we're saying, hey, go with our DB instance. As we know, we did with auth. This is exactly what we're doing with Firestore as well. We have one DB singleton instance, and we're saying, hey, get me the collection within the DB. And within this DB, what specific collection key are you looking for? Well, this is going to be the collection key that we pass in. So you can imagine that when we actually call this function, we're going to give it categories. So now that we have our collection reference, what are we going to do with this? Well, now what we have to do is we need to think about how to store each of these objects now inside of this new collection ref as a new document. Now, we are writing multiple different documents into a collection. So for us to do this, we need to actually think about this concept of transactions. A transaction is a word that represents a successful unit of work to a database. Now, a unit of work differs. It might be multiple sets of setting values into a collection. For us, we consider a successful write to this collection if all of the documents successfully wrote to that database. This means that there are numerous writes involved in this one single transaction. The single transaction being we stored all of the objects into this collection. The reason why you want to think about transactions like this is easily demonstrated when you think about a bank. If you imagine, and let's just use some examples. Let's say that we were a bank and we had a database that included me, Yihua, and in Yihua's bank account was $1,000. Then for Andre, he also had $1,000. We are two instances in the bank's database. Let's say that I wanted to transfer $100 from my bank account to Andre's bank account. What needs to happen on the database is that this database needs to see minus 100 on this value. So setting this value should go to 900. But Andre's bank account needs to see a plus 100, meaning that his value in the database must go up to 1100. As a result, these are two different writes, which means both of these writes have to go through in order for this transaction of me transferring $100 to Andre to be deemed as a successful transaction. This is considered one unit of work, even though there are two separate write events happening. There is a minus 100 that is writing to the database so that my 1,000 becomes 900, and there's a separate write so that Andre's 1,000 becomes 1,100. If only my minus 100 happened and Andre's 1,000 stays the same, this is not a successful transaction because this means that my account lost money but Andre did not gain money, so that money disappeared. This is the concept of a transaction, meaning that if Andre's write to the database, where writing this to 1100 for some reason failed, then this entire transaction failed, meaning that my write gets overturned, so that both accounts are back where they were before the transaction ever started. Only now is it possible for you to reattempt this maybe when your network is more secure or whatever issues that cause this to happen is fixed. This is the concept of a transaction. So we want to do the same thing. We want to make sure that all of our objects that we're trying to add to the collection are successfully added. And to do that, we need to use a batch. So a batch is what we get from that write batch method that we also imported from Firestore. So how to use this and continue building out our add collection documents is what we're going to cover in the next video. But now all you need to know is that we just created some collection. We got the collection reference. Now it's time to batch write these objects to there. So join me in the next video where we'll figure out how to use batch.